The start of souring tensions between Australia and China can be traced back to 2018, when Australia became the first country to publicly ban China's Huawei from its 5G network. As early as 2010, the federal government acted on ASIO's warnings about Huawei. The board of the NBN decided that it would not accept any of Huawei's bids to take part in the national broadband network. With repeated warnings from ASIO that Huawei was trying to infiltrate Australia's telecommunication systems in 2017, then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was considering banning Huawei from Australia. China took this as a personal attack on the Chinese Communist Party, with China's foreign ministry publicly stating that it was gravely concerned at Australia's discriminatory measures, and it warned that this decision would have a negative impact on the business interests in China of Australian companies. Then in 2020, Australia for the first time referred China to the World Trade Organization during a trade war between the two nations, which had begun after Australia had called for an independent investigation into the origins of COVID-19 pandemic. After the Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne and Prime Minister Scott Morrison both publicly announced they wanted an inquiry into the COVID-19 pandemic, China viewed this suggestion by Australia as an insult, after the Chinese government had been growing increasingly sensitive about the perception that it was to blame for the virus due to its origins in Wuhan. China is Australia's largest trading partner, with a two-way trade reaching a record $252 billion in 2019, and accounting for 27.4% of Australia's trade globally. This compared to Australia's next largest trading partner is Japan, with $88.5 billion. China and Australia are mutually dependent, as China needs Australia's iron ore and food, Australia needs an export partner. In November 2020, China announced a ban on Australian wine, coal, barley, copper ore, concentrate sugar, timber, and lobster. Although this had significant impact on Australian exporters, the damage had been largely offset as businesses find new markets overseas for their goods, with booming iron ore trade, with other partners making up for the losses with China. An example of this is the coal exports with China fell $6 billion, but exports with the rest of the world grew $9.5 billion. Australian businesses began looking for new market opportunities to help offset the losses they faced due to the trade sanctions China had placed on many of Australia's export industries. Currently, with the sanctions placed on 7 of Australia's export industries, the sanctions have been shown to have a low level of efficiency. Due to the demand for Australian iron ore globally, it has made up for the restrictions placed on trade by China. It has had more of an impact on China, with China being hard-pressed to replace the Australian products. The sanctions have empowered Australian businesses to look for new trade partners, and China has only succeeded in making its market matter less to Australian exporters, and it has lessened the fear of trade as a weapon. In August 2021, research from Oxford Economics showed that Australia's exports to China had jumped 24% from the previous year to reach $180 billion despite the trade war between Australia and China. Most of the rise is attributed by iron ore, thus showing that sanctions placed on Australian exports have damaged China more than it has affected the Australian economy. Although this looks promising, many industries have suffered far worse. Timber, seafood, beverages, edible oils, textiles, footwear, cereals, and sugar have been hardest hit, and continue to suffer significant levels of decreased demand. Australian businesses in these industries have struggled in the short term to find new market opportunities to replace their trade partners in China. But the long-term outlook looks promising, with new market opportunities opening up in neighbouring Asian countries to China. Barley: Australian growers have been hit with an anti-dumping tariff of 73.6% and anti-subsidy tariff of 6.9% that will apply for 5 years, with claims that Australian farmers had engaged in anti-competitive behavior. 2 grain exporters have also been suspended from selling barley into China. Beef and lamb. 8 Australian abattoirs are blocked from selling red meat to China. China has blacklisted 4 exporters over claims of mislabeling. 2 Queensland abattoirs were suspended over claims of contaminated meat. 2 Victorian processors are waiting for trade to resume as they had been delisted due to COVID-19 outbreaks in the processing plant. Wine sales to China have ground to a halt, with hundreds of containers held at ports. China claiming that Australian winemakers are dumping and the winemakers were subsidized. It has introduced tariffs of 200% for dumping and a further 6% for countervailing duties. Cotton. Australian exporters have been told by their customers in China that they have been instructed to stop buying Australian cotton, with Australian cotton facing a tariff of at least 40%, which would in turn make trade with China unviable for Australian producers. Lobsters. Tons of live lobsters were left to die in China's customs quarantine inspection in November 2020, with Chinese importers warned by officials to stop buying Australian lobster ahead of a possible ban. Timber. In 2019, half of Australia's timber exports went to China. Now China will not accept timber from 4 Australian states. Bark beetle detected in Queensland timber has led to it being banned, and then Chinese customs found bark beetle in Victorian timber, with South Australia and Tasmania added to the suspended list. Coal. $700 million worth of coal was left stranded off the Chinese coast, with 2 major ports refusing to unload the cargo. Coal was listed as a commodity that Chinese importers were warned to avoid. By December 2020, China had blocked Australian coal imports. Beef exports fell 60% initially but have recovered to track close to pre-trade dispute levels, due to more exports directed towards Japan and Korea. Copper ore exports to China are now 0, India and Korea has offset the losses, and total copper exports is trending upwards. Wine exports to UK and USA has increased, but the impact of restrictions from China have not made up the losses in this industry. Cotton exports are back to 2018 levels, with Vietnam and Indonesia offsetting the loss of trade with China. Barley exports are back to 2018 levels, with increased trade with Japan, Philippines, Thailand and Vietnam making up for the losses. Timber increases in trade with India and Malaysia have not made up for the loss of trade with China. Lobster exports have struggled, but higher exports to Hong Kong and Vietnam has helped the industry recover from the Chinese bans. Sugar. Korea now takes a larger share from Aussie exporters. A 2020 recommendation of grand gesture of signing up for the Belt and Road Initiative was put forward to help reset the relationship between Australia and China. The Belt and Road Initiative was announced at the end of 2013 by Chinese President, and it called for the building of a Silk Road economic belt and a 21st century maritime Silk Road to connect China's less developed border regions with neighboring countries, essentially connecting the underdeveloped hinterland with Europe through Central Asia. And the second leg of the plan is to connect the fast-growing Southeast Asian region to China's southern provinces through ports and railways, helping economic trade in the regions. Although seen as a gesture to the Chinese government, many are saying that Australia should not support the initiative. Bachelard 2018 wrote that after the Sydney Morning Herald's published stories of the initiative and Australia's possible involvement, more than 600 readers wrote in, with 59% suggesting Australia should avoid the initiative due to the overriding feeling that it is the Chinese government trying to gain economic dominance over the region and trying to dominate world trade. Another suggestion for the Australian government to help repair relations with China is in regard to Australia's foreign investment rules. China complains of the lack of transparency about which investments get approved, as it sees the process as ideological. The Australian government could postpone proposed amendments and consult with investor countries about how the process could be improved in Australia's self-interest. China's investment in Australia is of concern to most people due to the fact that China is a communist government that many feel is trying to buy up Australian assets to help it gain some control over Australia, but in fact, according to the Australian Government Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, China is ranked 9th compared to other countries, with only 2% of the total investment in 2020. With a reduction in investment from 2019 of -0.2%. With a 5-year trend growth of only 0.3%, which is well below the United Kingdom, France and Norway as our biggest growing foreign investment. Triggs 2021 has suggested that the Australian government should identify practical issues that they could address alongside China, looking for solutions that are mutually beneficial to both countries, that bring in countries from around Asia, and that use multilateral bodies. Climate change is of top priority in China and Asia, and is one avenue that the government can look into, working with the Chinese government and developing a working relationship between the two countries. Triggs 2021 also suggests that the World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank and World Health Organization are all institutions that are in desperate need of governance reform. Reforming these organizations and working with China will help reduce tensions and bring China further into a rules-based global system. Rebuilding the relationship will not be an easy or simple task, and there is not one solution for the Australian government to focus on. It will likely take many years and many changes in government for the Australia and China trade relationship to be back to where it was, but the one thing is the Australian government must begin now, otherwise more time will pass and more issues will become factors in the rebuilding of the trade relations between the two nations.